It was the kind of dinner that should have been forgotten, quiet, polished, draped in silk and silver. But something in the air that evening whispered otherwise. It was November 9th, 1880, the last time anyone saw Martha Cooperfield alive. The long oak table gleamed under candlelight. The mayor, Jonathan Cooperfield, a man with cold blue eyes and a permanent scowl etched into his face, raised his glass to toast an upcoming infrastructure bill. Martha sat beside him in a high-collared burgundy gown, her expression distant. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It hadn't for weeks. The guests, politicians, clergy, and business elites, laughed and clinked glasses, but beneath their banter was something brittle, a knowing silence between certain glances. Whispers drowned in claret and veal. Martha barely touched her food. Her fingers trembled as they hovered over the silver fork. She caught her reflection in the spoon, pale, hollow-eyed, almost unfamiliar. At exactly 8:13 p.m. she excused herself. "The headache," she said gently. No one followed. Her footsteps echoed down the marble hallway toward the drawing room, a place she had always felt watched in. One of the maids later said she heard the phonograph begin to play, though no one had wound it. A Chopin nocturne, faint and wavering. A sad lullaby. 15 minutes later, the butler found the room empty. No Martha, no trace. The window was unlatched, odd for such a cold night, and the wind carried in the scent of burning oil and something metallic. Mayor Cooperfield called the authorities at dawn, not midnight. That detail was buried in the reports. He told them she had run away, that she'd been sick, that she was mentally strained. But her diary, hidden beneath loose floorboards in the nursery, told another story. One line was underlined in red ink the day before she vanished. "They've made me a witness to something I cannot allow to live." For weeks after, the town gossiped. Some said she drowned herself. Others claimed she was pregnant with a child that wasn't the mayor's. One man, a church deacon, insisted she'd been taken by secret society men in black coats. They laughed at him, until he too disappeared. Martha Cooperfield was never seen again. No body, no blood, no confession. But Hartford changed after that night. The air felt heavier, the streets darker, and behind every curtain, people whispered the name Martha as if it carried a curse. And perhaps it did. They boarded up the nursery 2 days after Martha disappeared. No explanation, no ceremony, just 2 workers, silent, unshaven, nailing shut the doors to the one room in Cooperfield Manor that used to echo with laughter. But no child had played there in years. Their son, Thomas, died before his 6th birthday. Scarlet fever, they said. But there were rumors. Martha had spent most of her final days in that room. She took her meals there. She wrote there. Some said she talked to the walls. Others swore they heard lullabies at night, though there were no children in the house. The staff whispered of the rocking chair that creaked on its own. One maid quit after she claimed to see handprints, small, red and smeared, on the inside of the nursery window, on the 2nd floor. The diary was discovered nearly a month after her disappearance, hidden beneath the warped floorboards beneath the crib. A child's crib, untouched by time, still adorned with hand-stitched lace. Inside the diary were 27 entries, some mundane, others chilling, but one page stood out. It was a sketch. A figure in black robes, faceless, standing behind the crib. Above it, in careful cursive, "He visits when the clock chimes 3. He whispers from beneath the floor." The handwriting trembled at the end, the ink smeared, as if her hand had been pulled away mid-stroke. A visiting constable, curious and brave, or perhaps just foolish, pried open a small section of the wall 2 weeks later. What he found was never officially documented. But he never returned to Cooperfield Manor, nor to his post. His brother claimed he woke up one night to find the constable screaming, clawing at the wallpaper, saying, "She's in the walls. She never left." Whatever was in that room had been sealed away, silenced, buried. And yet, the townsfolk who passed by the manor at night swore they heard music, soft music box tones, again, and the faint sound of a woman crying, always at 3 a.m. The mayor dismissed it all. "Delusions of weak minds," he said at a town hall, but his eyes twitched when he said it. He'd taken to wearing black every day since the disappearance. Mourning, guilt, or fear. Something was still in that house, watching, waiting. And deep in the nursery walls, Martha's secrets weren't sleeping. They were listening. They buried an empty coffin. On November the 16th, 1880, 1 week after Martha's disappearance, the townspeople gathered at St. Bridget's Cemetery under a grey, silent sky. It rained that morning. Not a thunderstorm, not a cleansing downpour, just a steady, cold drizzle, as if the heavens were leaking grief too tired to cry out. The mayor wore his sash and his grief like armor, his face stony, his voice flat. He paid the priests double to conduct the rites without a body, without question. But even the priest, Father Mallory, hesitated before beginning. A casket lowered into the earth with no soul inside. It unsettled people. And in a town like Hartford, superstition ran just beneath the skin. As the coffin sank into the dirt, a woman screamed. It wasn't grief, it was panic. She claimed to have seen a figure behind the trees at the cemetery's edge. A woman, pale, soaking wet, wearing a burgundy dress, the same Martha had worn on the night of the supper. Several townsfolk rushed to check. No one was there, only mist. But the scent of perfume, jasmine and rose, hung faintly in the air. Then, during the final prayer, the church bells tolled on their own, 11 times. Father Mallory's hands trembled. He closed the book early. Whispers followed the mayor back to Cooperfield Manor. They said it wasn't a funeral. It was a cover, a ritual, a final silencing. Because Martha hadn't just vanished. She had known things no one was supposed to know. According to her cousin, Lillian Morse, a seamstress who had once lived with the Cooperfields, Martha had uncovered a ledger in the mayor's study weeks before she vanished. It wasn't just politics. It wasn't finances. It listed names, dates, ritual symbols, and phrases in Latin too archaic for even the priests to translate. Lillian said Martha brought the book to her in tears, begging for advice. But the next morning the book was gone. Martha claimed the mayor had been watching her sleep. A week later, she disappeared. The townspeople never truly believed the funeral. The coffin felt wrong. Lillian refused to attend. "You don't bury the truth," she said. "You chain it down and pray it never breaks loose." But in Cooperfield Manor, the chains were old, and someone, was already tugging from the other side. Hartford had buried a box, but they hadn't buried Martha. The letter was dated October 28, 1880, just 5 days before Martha vanished. It was found weeks later, hidden beneath the floorboards of Lillian Morse's tailor shop, wrapped in wax cloth and bound with twine, not mailed, not sealed, just buried. The handwriting was unmistakably Martha's, precise, elegant, but frantic in tone. The ink bled at the edges, as if written under pressure, or worse, through tears. The recipient. Sister Catherine Arnott, a nun-turned-schoolteacher who had once studied with Martha in Boston, a woman known for her intellect and her defiance of the church's silence on occult matters. The letter read like a confession. "Dear Catherine, if you are reading this, something has happened. Perhaps to me, perhaps to all of us. But I can no longer stay quiet. I found it, in his study, not just the ledger but the names. Catherine, they're townspeople, children, parish men, girls who vanished from the convent, all signed beneath a mark I've never seen, and a phrase repeated, Libera me ex tenebris. Free me from the darkness. He says they are nothing, that I am ill, but I see it now. Every council meeting, every closed-door sermon, he's not protecting the town, he's binding it." The letter ended abruptly. The final lines were smudged into illegibility, save for a final phrase scratched in haste. "He comes when I sleep. There's something in the mirror. If I go missing..." And then it stops. Catherine Arnott brought the letter to the sheriff. The sheriff went missing the next day. His office was ransacked. No sign of forced entry, only a broken mirror, 7 shards laid carefully on the floor in a semicircle. A symbol no one recognized was etched into the wood behind it, burned deep, still warm to the touch. The mayor claimed the sheriff had gone on leave. "Family business," he said. But the sheriff's mother had died a decade earlier, and he had no surviving relatives. The mirror pieces were taken for evidence, but they vanished before sunrise. Catherine fled Hertford that night. Her last known letter, addressed to the bishop in Providence, simply said, "Do not look into the glass." She tried, and now she's inside it. What Martha uncovered wasn't politics. It wasn't a scandal. It was a covenant, inked in blood, bound by mirrors, and protected by a man who wore the mask of power, and perhaps something darker underneath. Martha had written a warning, but by the time anyone read it, she had already become part of the silence. At first glance, the attic was unremarkable. Dust-covered trunks, moth-eaten curtains. A childhood rocking horse leaned against the wall, still and cracked from years of heat and cold, but in the farthest corner, where the beams groaned the loudest and the air never seemed to move, stood a mirror. 7 feet tall, blackened glass, no frame, just hanging. Not attached to the wall, not resting on the floor, floating, ever so slightly, as if suspended by a force that didn't belong in this world. That's where it began, Lillian later claimed. That's where Martha found it. She had gone into the attic searching for her winter shawl, but what she found instead was her own reflection, turning without her. The mirror didn't show what was there. It showed something else, shadows that moved when no one walked, a version of herself that blinked at the wrong time, and then, days later, the voice. Martha told Lillian it whispered her name at night, not in anger, not in love, in familiarity, as though it had known her long before she was born. She tried to cover it, threw sheets over the glass, even turned the mirror to face the wall, but it always reappeared in the same position by morning, uncovered, upright, clean, despite the filth that swallowed the rest of the attic. Then came the night of the séance. Uninvited, unannounced, but undeniable. Lillian heard the footsteps upstairs at 1:11 a.m. 3 sets. 1 barefoot, 1 with boots, and 1 that didn't quite touch the floor. She crept up with a candle, but the attic door was locked from the inside. When she returned the next morning, Martha was in her chair, eyes wide open, completely unresponsive. The mirror behind her fogged from the inside. She said nothing for 2 days. And then, on the 3rd day, she spoke. Only once. "He's behind the glass. That's all." After that, Martha became quieter, jittery, always lower and poking over her shoulder, even in daylight. She refused to enter the attic again. But that mirror, no matter how many times it was moved, covered, or sealed away, always found its way back to that corner, like it belonged to the house, or the house belonged to it. Some say it wasn't a mirror at all. It was a gate, a pact, a prison. And when Martha looked into it, something stared back and never looked away. If you ask the locals today about 84 Briar Lane, they'll tell you it's just an old house, empty, abandoned, rotting like the memories it buried. But in 1880, that house was a statement. Grand, polished mahogany staircases, imported chandeliers from Paris, velvet wallpaper so thick it muffled your steps, a symbol of Mayor Elijah Cooperfield's status and Martha's isolation, because somewhere within its perfect design, time itself stopped. Literally. The grandfather clock at the base of the stairs, an heirloom from Elijah's ancestors in Prussia, never struck 12. It would chime 11, pause, and reset, as if it knew better. Martha noticed it first. She kept a diary, hidden under a loose floorboard in the parlor. She wrote, "Time refuses to pass in this place. At midnight the air holds its breath. My lamp flickers. The walls hum. I can hear the creaking above, but no one's there." She was right. There were no footsteps, but the creaking, always just past 11, sounded too deliberate, too human. She asked Elijah to fix the clock. He told her, "The clock is fine. It's the house that listens too much." That same night she covered all the mirrors with sheets, and every night after, she found at least one uncovered. Servants left. One maid ran screaming from the house, claiming the mirror smiled back at her. Another disappeared entirely. Her boots were found standing at the edge of the attic door, neatly placed, as if she had stepped out of them, and into something else. The townsfolk began whispering. Witchcraft, some said. Madness, others claimed. But the old women, the ones with grey veils and rosary beads, said it plainly. She lives in the hour that doesn't exist. 11 to 12, the lost hour. The moment before the veil thins. That's when Martha would sit alone in the parlour, the fireplace unlit, the clock behind her ticking endlessly. And every now and then she would raise her head and whisper to the dark. Some say she was praying, others say she was answering, because if you listened closely at 11:55 you could hear something ticking against the mirror upstairs. Not from the clock, but from inside the glass. And when you heard that, you never heard the 12th chime again. By late November, Martha Cooperfield had become a woman split between two realities. By day, she wore the expected mask, chin held high, hair immaculate, a small gold cross pinned to her throat. But by night, that mask cracked. Her hands trembled, her voice thinned, and sometimes she'd speak in a dialect no one recognized. Not even the doctor. Dr. Isaac Holloway was a skeptic, a Yale man, clean-shaven, always punctual, famous for his refusal to entertain female hysteria. He was summoned by Mayor Cooperfield not once, but thrice, each time with growing urgency. His first visit ended in polite confusion. Martha was tired, nothing more. The second, she refused to let him touch her, said her bones weren't hers anymore. But the third, that visit changed him forever. He arrived just before sunset. Rain clung to his hat. The house was colder than it should have been, every window sealed, every curtain drawn. Martha was waiting in the parlour, but she wasn't seated. She was standing, perfectly still, facing the far wall, a mirror covered by thick black velvet behind her. "Mrs. Cooperfield?" he asked. She didn't respond. He stepped closer. Her breath was shallow, her pupils dilated, and beneath her fingernails, blood, though no wounds were visible. Then, finally, she spoke. But the voice that came out wasn't hers. It was male, gravelly, accented, speaking Latin, or something close to it. Dr. Holloway recoiled. He'd seen seizures, psychosis, delirium. But this was none of those. He made for his bag, to sedate her. But the moment he turned his back, the mirror uncovered itself. He swore it. In his sworn statement filed 1 week later before he vanished from public life, he wrote, "The cloth slid off the glass without wind, without hand. I saw my own face staring back, but behind it something older, something vast." He fled the Cooperfield home that night and never returned. When a colleague pressed him months later, he whispered one sentence and nothing more. "There's something in that house that mimics the living and feeds on their reflection." After that, Dr. Holloway burned his clinic records, sold his estate, and was last seen boarding a ship to Buenos Aires. He never practiced again. And as for Martha, the next evening she was caught speaking to someone through the fireplace. Her words didn't echo, because whoever she spoke to was speaking back from inside the flue. By winter's grip in early December, St. Augustine's parish stopped ringing its bells, not because of snowfall, but because the Cooperfield furnace had started talking. It began subtly, murmurs, like wind through rusted pipes, the kind of sound you could ignore if you wanted to. But Martha didn't ignore it. She leaned into it. At first, she would press her ear to the furnace grate and sit motionless for hours. Servants whispered she was praying. Others said she was listening for someone, her dead father, a stillborn child, even God. But then, she started answering back. One night, housemaid Clara Bennett entered the drawing room to stoke the fire. She never forgot what she saw. Martha knelt before the furnace, naked, hair soaked in ash, whispering in a tongue not spoken in New England. Her arms were outstretched. The furnace roared, not with fire, but with laughter. Low, guttural, human. Clara dropped the coal bucket and fled. Her report to the authorities was laughed off. The mayor's wife, possessed, drunk more like. Except Clara wasn't alone. Within 2 days, the mayor's butler, Lyle, was found in the cellar, ears bleeding, eardrums ruptured. He'd apparently spent too long near the furnace's air ducts. His last words, scribbled in chalk on the wall: "It talks louder if you fear it." Mayor Cooperfield tried to destroy the furnace. He brought in masons to seal the flue, blacksmiths to unbolt the iron belly. But every morning the furnace remained, untouched, unsinged, grinning with soot. And it began to speak names. Martha's diary documents this clearly. It whispered my mother's name, then my confessor's, then Elijah's. It knows who we are. It calls itself the Listener. It wants a trade. Soon after, every clock in the house froze at 11:57, and the voices multiplied, chanting, singing, sometimes crying like a baby, sometimes mimicking Martha's own voice, down to her exact pitch and phrasing. One night the mayor stood at the top of the staircase, hearing Martha's voice from the furnace, while she slept beside him in bed. The next day, Elijah boarded up the furnace room entirely, nailed the door shut with iron stakes. But at midnight, the boards burst outward from within, and in the ash pile left behind, a cracked locket containing a photograph of a man no one in the Cooperfield family ever recognized, except Martha, who only said he was never buried. By December 13th, Martha stopped eating food, not out of protest but necessity. She claimed her throat rejected earthly things, broths, breads, even water. Everything came up dry. Her stomach churned at the smell of meat. Fruits withered when left near her. But one thing she could keep down: ash. Black, bitter ash scraped from the corners of the fireplace. At first the servants thought it was grief madness, symptoms of the nervous breakdown everyone had been whispering about for months. But then Martha began insisting the ash wasn't just sustenance. She said it was memory. Every flake has a name, she told Elijah, a date, a whisper trapped in its burn. Some of them are children, some of them priests. She kept a pewter bowl by her bedside. Each night she would sit cross-legged, hunched over it, inhaling handfuls like sacred wafers. The mayor tried to intervene, tried to have her institutionalized. But the asylum physician sent to evaluate her only stayed 20 minutes before vomiting in the hallway and walking straight back to his carriage. His notes were never made public. Within days, Martha's lips turned grey. Her teeth blackened at the roots. When she smiled, flakes of soot drifted from her gums like snow, and her voice, no longer hers. It was deeper, more ancient. Her accent faded, replaced by something that sounded old world, like a Bavarian priest had possessed her lungs, and she began to recite names in her sleep, all of them local, men who worked for the mayor. One was a councilman, another a constable. By the time the fifth name was spoken, Judge Lathrop, Elijah realized they were all people who helped cover up the original mill fire in 1867. The fire that was supposed to be an accident, the fire that left 12 workers unaccounted for, their bodies never found. Martha's sleep talk revealed more. Burial sites behind the orchard. Names erased from church records. One passage repeated nightly. Ash to ash, but their bones remember. He who burns must be consumed. When Elijah dug beneath the orchard the next morning, he found charred vertebrae, still warm, but no sign of who or what had put them there. And that night, Martha did something truly terrifying. She stood at the foot of her husband's bed, eyes pitch black, voice not her own, and whispered, "One of them lives in your mirror. The others are already inside the walls." Then she vanished into the dark, and the furnace roared without flame. December 17th, 1880. Mayor Elijah Cooperfield smashed every mirror in the house. Not out of vanity, out of fear. Because something had started watching him from the glass. At first it was small, a flicker, a shadow that moved when he didn't. But then he began seeing faces, not his, not Martha's, not anyone still alive. They would smile, whisper, bleed from the eyes. One cracked a grin so wide its cheeks split open. Another mimicked his own voice and said, "You've always been the liar." One night he caught a reflection of himself in the parlor mirror, standing behind his own back, grinning. Except he was alone in the room. He tore the mirror from the wall and hurled it down the staircase. It shattered into 13 jagged shards. Each shard reflected a different room in the house, each room empty of him. But one shard showed Martha, naked, kneeling, covered in ash, inside a brick tunnel they'd never seen before. Elijah gathered the staff, demanded they search the foundation. After hours of banging, they found it, a bricked-over doorway behind the furnace. They broke it open. What they discovered was not part of any original blueprint. A tunnel, narrow, red brick, hot to the touch, and lined with child-sized handprints in black soot. The further they ventured, the more the temperature dropped, unnaturally so. One of the servants, young Jacob, began to convulse. He cried out, "The ash is watching us! It's alive! It remembers the fire!" The mayor pressed on, torch in hand. They reached a chamber, a rotunda buried beneath the home, carved from limestone. At its center stood a mirrored pillar, 6 feet tall, polished like obsidian. The torchlight wouldn't reflect on it. Martha was there, naked, kneeling, chanting the names of the 12 burned laborers. Her skin was etched with soot-black symbols, not written, but carved, and the mirrored pillar, it responded. Faces bubbled beneath its surface like boiling oil. Mouths gasped silently. One of them was Elijah's own. He screamed for Martha to stop, but she turned to him, pupils vanished, and whispered in a voice that echoed from inside the pillar, "The mirror does not reflect. It remembers. You lied, and now it will show." Suddenly the mirrored surface split down the center like a wound. A hand reached through, burned, blackened, clawed. Jacob fled. 2 others followed. But Elijah couldn't move, because the hand was reaching for his face. And when it touched him, he was no longer standing in the chamber. He was inside the mirror, watching himself leave. Elijah Cooperfield opened his eyes, but he wasn't in his home. Not anymore. He was trapped in something that looked like his home, only wrong, as if reality had been copied from memory, then redrawn by a trembling, feverish hand. The walls bled ash from their seams, the windows showed nothing but fog, the portraits blinked. He screamed, but no sound came out, only soot. His breath had turned to dust. The mirror world pulsed with a slow, guttural hum, like the house itself was alive and breathing, waiting, watching. In the hallway, where the family Bible used to sit, there now rested a single item, a ledger. Its pages were scorched but readable. Each name listed in it had a death beside it, burned, silenced, vanished, betrayed. And at the bottom, Elijah Cooperfield, awaiting judgment, a reflection of judgment. Because this world, this mirrored hell, was built from every lie he ever told, every denial of guilt, every favor granted to cover blood with doctrine, every burned body that had screamed too loud. He wandered the corridors of this upside-down place, hunted by whispers. Martha's voice echoed everywhere, but it was no longer soft. It was commanding. Did you think they would forget? That fire eats truth? That ash buries guilt? No, Elijah. You made this. Now live in it. Each door he opened revealed a piece of his crimes, a child gasping for air behind a furnace grate, a worker with melted skin banging on a locked mill door, a priest with eyes stitched shut baptizing babies in black water. He tried to run, but his feet sank into ash. The ash was rising. Soon it reached his knees, then his chest, then his throat. He saw the mirror again, this time from inside it. On the other side stood his double, a version of him that grinned, calm and free. It raised a finger to its lips. "Shh," it said, "we've taken your place." Back in the real world, Elijah's body walked out of the tunnel. But it wasn't Elijah anymore. It was something ancient, cloaked in his skin. And Martha followed behind it, smiling. Together, they ascended the stairs. The staff looked on in horror. They knew something was wrong, but said nothing, because the new Elijah spoke with a voice like silk-wrapped coal, and when he looked at you, you saw your sins staring back. And in his study, hanging once again above the fireplace, was a mirror. But it didn't show reflections anymore, only the people who never made it out of the fire. By Christmas Eve of 1880, Black Hollow had changed. People whispered that the mayor had returned from some illness, but he looked different, healthier, younger somehow, yet no one could meet his eyes for long. They said it felt like he was peeling away your thoughts, stripping you down to your worst day. He resumed his duties at Town Hall, spoke with poise, signed documents with ink that looked unnaturally dark, more like oil than ink. But the townspeople noticed strange things. The church bells stopped ringing. Birds no longer perched on the Cooperfield roof, and every dog in town began to howl at sunset, then cower under porches when Elijah passed by. The mayor's voice was quieter now, but when he spoke, it echoed twice, once in the air, and once inside your skull. One evening, Deacon Whitlow, an old friend of Elijah's, attempted a private meeting. He emerged hours later, pale as frost, muttering, "That's not him, not anymore." By New Year's, the Cooperfield home had become a fortress. Heavy drapes sealed off every window. Visitors were turned away by silent servants whose mouths seemed stitched tight. Lanterns never flickered, yet the house glowed from within, a soft red pulse like a heartbeat. Martha, too, was different. She wore white every day, walked barefoot through the snow, and never blinked. Her hair, once golden, had gone completely black, overnight. Children said she smiled too much. Adults said she never smiled at all. Rumors spread of changes in the mayor's office. New policies, secret inspections, entire basements sealed with government orders. One man, a coal worker, vanished after filing a complaint about furnace ash being dumped into the river. The next day, his name was erased from town records. Not crossed out, removed, as if he'd never existed. But something even more chilling happened on January 3rd. During Mass, a child, 8-year-old Samuel Pratt, began screaming when he looked at the Cooperfields. He pointed at them and cried, "That's not a man, that's a hole wearing his skin." He was taken outside, quieted, moved away to live with relatives in Boston. No one mentioned it again. Yet one by one, the townsfolk began locking their mirrors in cellars. Some even smashed them, because too many had begun to report the same nightmare. A figure standing behind them in the mirror, smiling, whispering, "I'm almost here." And always behind that figure stood Martha, waiting. The first snowfall of February 1881 revealed something the town could no longer ignore. It wasn't just footprints. It was the absence of them. The Cooperfield estate had remained untouched by snow. No drifts against the door, no white dusting the windowsills, not even a trace on the roof, as if winter knew to stay away or had been warned. But it was what happened inside the church archives that truly shook Black Hollow. Father Elric, the aging archivist, had grown suspicious of the town's shifting records. Too many blank spots, altered dates, names scratched from ledgers. One night, armed with nothing but a lantern and an old key, he descended into the church's sealed records vault. He expected mold, dust, maybe some forgotten baptisms. Instead, he found the Ledger of the Lost, bound in stitched leather, damp to the touch, and humming faintly like a dying heartbeat. Inside were names, hundreds of them, people the town had forgotten, people who had never left, people who had been fed. The ledger was written in alternating hands, some elegant, some frantic, but one entry caught Elric's trembling eye. Martha Ann Cooperfield died October 31st, 1880. Cause, witnessed too much, refused silence. Then below, a chilling annotation. Reclaimed, November 2nd, 1880. Returned to sender. Elric fled. He ran through the snow, bareheaded and sobbing, clutching the cursed book. He didn't make it far. They found him the next morning, frozen solid outside the church steps, arms curled around the ledger, face twisted in terror. But the ledger was gone, removed. No tracks. Just one message scratched into the stone wall behind him, etched in something like iron. You do not write what was never meant to be read. Now the town could no longer pretend. People gathered in secret. Stories were shared about the strange knockings under the mayor's home, the priest who bled from the ears after communion, the schoolteacher who went blind after giving Martha a book. Every tale pointed to the same conclusion. Something had returned with the mayor. Something old. Something hungry. The Cooperfields hadn't just survived the fire. They had become it. And the town wasn't just haunted. It was being rewritten. Every memory, every name, every truth. Black Hollow had become a ledger of the lost, and the ink they used to write it was blood. By mid-February, time no longer felt right in Black Hollow. Clocks stopped obeying. At first they ticked backwards at midnight. Then they began to spin wildly, hands circling so fast they snapped off. People awoke in places they hadn't fallen asleep, or worse, found hours missing altogether. The town postmaster, a punctual man all his life, delivered the same letter 3 days in a row, each time with different handwriting. On Sunday, March 1st, a thick fog settled in, but only over the Cooperfield estate. The fog didn't move with the wind, it pulsed. Within days it began crawling down the hillside, street by street, devouring lantern light, muffling sound. Children lost inside it said they heard their mothers calling, but the voices were slightly wrong. Something was coming through. That's when Dr. Felix Moreau, a rational man and war veteran, decided to confront the mayor. He marched to the estate, pistol in hand, and vanished for 36 hours. When he returned, he was barefoot, whispering numbers. 18791, she is the key, she's the gate. He died before sunrise. His eyes had been burned black from the inside, and yet Martha thrived. She no longer walked the streets, she glided. Her feet didn't leave tracks in mud or snow. Witnesses swore her hair no longer moved in the wind. Some claimed her dress shimmered, not fabric but something closer to membrane, like skin. But it was what she carried that terrified most. A mirror, oval, framed in gold and always wrapped in cloth. She would visit homes uninvited, stand in doorways, and unwrap it silently. One by one, townsfolk looked and screamed, not at what they saw, but at what they became. One girl clawed her own face off after peeking. An old man drowned himself in a dry well. Those who resisted Martha's visits found something far worse: duplicates, copies of themselves seen walking the woods at night, half-formed things, grinning, mouthing secrets no one should know. One woman chased hers into the fog and was never seen again. But her voice echoed through town that night, from every chimney at once. She showed me what we are, and what we'll be. The veil between the world and whatever waited beyond it was now threadbare. And Martha was pulling the final stitch. It happened on the Ides of March, a date long feared by prophets and whispered by the mad. At precisely 3:03 a.m. a sound tore through Black Hollow. Not thunder, not wind. A scream stretched across the sky like the ripping of flesh from bone. Dogs howled, infants went silent, and every mirror in town cracked down the center. The veil was no longer thinning. It had split. And Martha Cooperfield stood at the center of it, mirror in hand, dress soaked in shadow. Witnesses, those who still dared to speak, said she had gathered 13 townsfolk inside the old chapel. Each one had vanished in the days prior. Teachers, shopkeepers, a constable, people once trusted. She arranged them in a circle, blindfolded and humming something older than Latin, a sound not meant for human throats. Above them, the mirror hovered, without chains, without hands. The gold frame pulsed. It was no longer a reflection, but a door. Through it you could glimpse something watching. Not a face, not even a form, just a presence, blacker than death, deeper than time. It bled into the room, and with it came the other Martha, paler, taller, limbs slightly too long, her head tilted unnaturally, as if bones were suggestions. She wore a mockery of a wedding dress, stitched from stitched faces. Her smile never moved, but it grew. The townsfolk began to convulse. One by one, they fell to their knees, blood seeping from their ears and noses. The chapel walls dripped, not water, but ink. The pews melted. The crucifix above the altar inverted itself, wood splitting open as if in agony. The mirror drank it all. The ritual had begun. Martha, our Martha, stepped into the mirror, and the other Martha stepped out. In that moment, reality shivered. Birds fell dead mid-flight. Crops withered in seconds. Every church bell in town rang once, then cracked in half. The town clock froze on 3:03 a.m. permanently. And those who tried to flee, their paths twisted back to town no matter how far they ran. Roads looped, rivers vanished, maps changed. Black Hollow was no longer in Massachusetts. It was in her. It had become a mirror, and everyone still alive was now on the wrong side of the glass. The worst part, they could still see us, watching, waiting, whispering. Your world is next. By April, nothing in Black Hollow cast a shadow. Not trees, not buildings, not people. The sun still rose, but its light felt wrong, like a memory forced into a shape, flat, too quiet. Residents no longer saw themselves in mirrors. They saw Martha, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying, sometimes mouthing words in reverse, but always watching. Windows turned into portals. Even puddles weren't safe. A child looking into a rain barrel saw her reflection blink a moment after she did, and then smile. When she didn't, every reflective surface became her eye, even spoons. That's when Harlan Finch, the town's last schoolteacher, made a choice. A skeptic, a widower, a man with nothing left to lose. He had studied folklore, mirror lore, and forbidden rituals tucked into the back pages of banned books. He believed the town hadn't just been cursed, it had been mirrored, trapped in a reflection of itself, and the only way out was shattering it. But no ordinary glass would do. He spoke with the old gravedigger, Isaiah Mourns, a blind man who had seen too much. Isaiah told him of the Black Pane, a relic buried beneath the original church in 1794, sealed in ash and iron. It was said to be a window into a purer world, made by monks who feared what mirrors could become. If it still existed, it might be the only glass Martha couldn't twist. That night, as fog clawed the chapel walls and distant screams echoed from no mouths, Harlan dug. Hands bleeding, breath short, dirt wet and warm, like it remembered being flesh. Hours passed, until he found it. Not glass, but something darker, absorbing light, drinking breath. A pane of obsidian no bigger than a book. He carried it to the old bell tower, the only place Martha hadn't stepped foot since the veil split. Perhaps the bell's last toll had wounded her. There, under a shattered moon, he waited. And when the reflection came, Martha smiling in every pane of broken glass around him, he didn't run. He held up the black pane, and for the first time, she recoiled, screamed. Cracks formed across her face in every mirror of town. Somewhere walls buckled, a church bell moaned. Fog fled like prey. Harlan had hurt her. But as he collapsed, breathless and pale, a single whisper slithered from the air behind him. Now, she sees you. The glass hadn't just shown her pain, it had shown him. And Martha never forgets a face. For 3 days after Harlan Finch held up the black pane, no one saw Martha. Not in mirrors, not in puddles, not in doorways. And for a moment, Black Hollow exhaled. Children laughed again, the fog receded, the air tasted like April rain, not old breath. Some believed it was over, that Harlan had driven her away, that she had fled. But they were wrong. She hadn't fled. She'd been watching, studying, waiting. Because when Harlan used the pane, he didn't just repel her. He cracked the veil. And Martha, no longer a single woman, poured through it. It began with reflections acting on their own. A man shaving in the mirror watched his reflection smile and slit its own throat. Yet he was unharmed, until the next morning, when he awoke with a scar he never earned. A newborn baby refused to stop crying, pointing at a hand mirror and shrieking a word no one had taught her. Other, other, other. One night, a group of men dragged every mirror in town into the square, smashed them all, and lit a fire. The flames turned blue, and laughed. Every shard left behind hummed. Some bled, others whispered. But all of them reflected one thing: a town upside down, where the sky dripped, trees grew inward, and Martha stood in every doorway. It was the mirror world, and it was coming closer. Doors refused to open, windows bricked themselves overnight, candles flickered black. The town was folding in on itself, building by building, as if someone had taken a photograph and was crumpling it slowly, carefully, cruelly. Then, on April 17th at 3:33 a.m., the church bell rang, despite no rope, no wind, no one inside. It rang once, and from every cracked surface in town, she emerged. Not as flesh, not as ghost, but as memory incarnate. Faces blurred, skin like ripples on water, eyes deep, hollow, spinning. Martha wasn't alone. Behind her came others, reflections that had never been. Inborn, versions of townsfolk with smiles carved too wide, eyes where mouths should be, mouths that whispered futures no one wanted. The mirrors had held possibilities. Now, they held escapees. And Martha, standing in the square, turned to the sky and whispered one final phrase: "Let the real become the reflection." The world shivered. Somewhere, Harlan Finch screamed, not in pain, but in understanding. He hadn't saved the town. He had unlocked the gate. It was no longer Black Hollow. At least, not as we knew it. On the night of April 18th, the town divided. Not by vote, not by war, but by perception. Two realities overlapped. One was the Black Hollow built by brick, breath and blood. The other, a layered echo stitched from reflections and rot, overseen by Martha's shadow. Those who hadn't shattered their mirrors began seeing the split first. You'd walk into your kitchen, and your reflection would walk into something else. You'd reach for a spoon, and your mirror self would raise a scalpel. You'd smile, and your double would stare, unmoving, like a portrait left too long in the sun. The split town, as it came to be known, had rules, and you either learned them or vanished. Rule 1. Never trust your reflection after 3 a.m. Rule 2. If your mirror blinks but you don't, run. Rule 3. Martha is closest where things are forgotten. Old rooms, locked drawers, the attic. Rule 4. The church bell means she's listening. Stop thinking. Those who broke the rules disappeared into the between space. One woman, Edna Wilkins, was found standing perfectly still in her backyard for 3 days. When asked what she was doing, she replied, "Waiting for my inside to come back." She never blinked again. Others were less lucky. Children began drawing towns with 2 suns, one gold, one black, and in every drawing, standing between them, was a woman in a burgundy dress, faceless, except for the mouth, stitched shut with thread made of names. Martha didn't kill to kill. She collected. The mayor's office issued statements, but none were signed. By then, the mayor hadn't been seen in weeks. Some believed his reflection took his place long ago. Others whispered he'd gone willingly, that he now ruled beside Martha in the mirror world, twisted by guilt and ambition. Harlan Finch vanished the night of the split. His home was found. Empty, the word echo etched into every surface, wood, metal, even water. Some say he crossed over, seeking penance. Others believe he never existed, just a fabrication stitched from fear to justify what came next. The veil between worlds was no longer a veil. It was a door. And Martha had the key. She had torn the fabric of truth and lie, pulled history inside out, and remade Black Hollow into a reflection of what it tried to bury. And what it buried was her. The town's final records come from Father Albin, the last man who dared enter Martha's estate and live long enough to write it down. His journal was discovered buried beneath the church altar, wrapped in a child's christening gown, burned at the edges and still warm. He wrote of descending into the basement of the Cooperfield mansion, now a rotten cathedral of glass and breath. Walls were covered in mirrors, but none showed him, only Martha, standing beside him, smiling, silent, always behind him. He never turned around. At the center of the room sat the mirror. But it was no ordinary object. It was not made of glass. He described it as a pool that dreams of being seen, a surface that remembered every eye that gazed into it and punished them for what they wished they hadn't seen. It pulsed like flesh. It hummed when prayers were spoken. It wept when lies were told. The mirror was not Martha's tool. It was her origin. It was left behind long before the town, before the church, before the land had a name. It had waited, patient and silent, until Martha, curious, wounded, brilliant, heard it whisper her true name, the one buried beneath her baptism. She wasn't just murdered. She was transformed. The mayor and his council hadn't simply covered up a death. They had unleashed an entity, a reflection born of shame, memory, and divine rage, not vengeance, but restoration, of what no one yet knows. Father Albin claims the mirror showed him every moment the town lied, when they rewrote laws to protect their own, when they burned the black orphanage and blamed structural rot, when they sterilized women deemed excessive, when they buried pregnant teens in unmarked graves behind the church. The mirror was a record of every silence, and Martha was the archive come alive. At the journal's end, Father Albin writes, "She doesn't want revenge, she wants remembrance. She wants the town to reflect itself until it screams." And then a final chilling line. "Tonight, I offered her confession. She showed me my soul. I left it there, where it belonged. I am no longer father." The mirror now stands in the old town square, covered, waiting. And every year, on April 23rd, the date of Martha's murder, the cloth covering it grows thinner. They gathered, like always, on April 23rd. The townspeople, what few remained, stood silently around the veiled mirror in the square. Children held hands, elders stared at the ground, some prayed, some muttered names they hadn't spoken in decades. The cloth covering the mirror rippled, though there was no wind. At 3:00 a.m., as it always happened, the bell of St. Vespers tolled 13 times, and the veil fell. It didn't flutter. It collapsed, like breath leaving lungs. For a heartbeat, the mirror reflected nothing, just the town square, empty and grey. Then it began to bleed light, a pale gold shimmer that bent shadows the wrong way. From its surface, faces emerged. Hundreds, maybe thousands, all the forgotten, all the silenced, their eyes wide, mouths open, screaming, but no sound came. At the center of them stood Martha. Not the girl from 1880, not the mayor's wife. Something else, something vast and knowing and ancient, a being wrapped in all the memory the town tried to bury. Her mouth, once sewn shut, was now open, and from it poured the town's secrets. You could hear them. Even if you covered your ears, you heard how the schoolmaster bribed judges to imprison immigrant boys. You heard how the old apothecary mixed morphine in infants' bottles. You heard what the mayor's real estate deals were really covering. You heard your own name, whispered with judgment or mercy. One woman collapsed to her knees, confessing to a crime no one had ever suspected. Another man simply turned and walked into the mirror. He never came out. The mayor's statue, standing behind the mirror, cracked down the center, revealing a hollow chamber filled with ledgers, bones, and a final decree dated 1880. To preserve the image of Black Hollow, Martha Cooperfield must be erased from history, body, spirit, and word. They failed. She is not erased. She is remembered now in Eve. Rye whisper, every flickering mirror, every town that looks the other way when horror hides behind wealth and power. Some say Martha finally passed that night. Others believe she now lives inside the mirror, offering it to other towns with dirty hands and smiling masks, offering reflection in the cruelest form, truth. Black Hollow is quiet now. The mirror is gone. But if you ever wake at 3 a.m. and your reflection is just a moment too slow, you might want to ask yourself, what does your town deserve to remember? And what did you help it forget?